Alright, so now we're at the stage of getting ready to render this thing. All of our texturing is pretty much done. There's nothing else we would want to change as far as the final look of this. Just based on what I have in my scene, you can get an idea of the level of detail that we have in the scene. Okay, now obviously we could go into further detail in a lot of these areas and really make some of these things kind of punch out a bit more. But I'm going to keep it here at this level just because we could literally work on this thing for months and months and months and never really finish with it. All right. So you see I have some, oops, I've actually created better looking signs here. I have over here I've created, it's hard to see in this view, let me go change this to viewport. Alright, so I've created some items inside of my window here. And this is stuff that I modeled in the for my intro class. I just dropped in here. And you're so far away you don't really see it. Some things we want to keep in mind when we're doing any rendering is that we have to have all of our materials as Mias. And I'm actually getting my hypershade is not opening. And this is a common thing, and I'm actually glad these little issues happen. I was working before on dual monitors at a bigger resolution, and now it's not showing up. So I'm going to close my file, sure. And then I'm going to go to my preferences. Okay, so here's my preferences, and this is my latest 2014 folder. And inside of preferences, inside of here, there's a Windows Pref Mel. If I go in here and edit this, it lists the window position for every single one of my windows. So you see on this one, it's the visor panel is opening up at this location. There it is, that location. So some of these may just not even really be on my screen. So I'm going to fix this by just deleting the window prefs and then reopening Maya. And what that will do is just reset any of those preferences that I had set up. So it takes it back to where we need to be. Okay, so just reopen my file. Okay, then I can open up the hypershade. And you'll see the hypershade now pops right into its default position right here. So each one of these materials has to be a Mia in order for our rendering stuff to work. So I'm going to go to View as List, just because that doesn't need to refresh and it's actually a bit quicker. And if I just hold my mouse over each one of these things, I can see that each one of their little pop-ups there, the little yellow box that pops up, says Mia Material X Passes. If any of these that I'm using do not say X Passes, then I cannot do my render passes and I need to reassign those things. So I'm just going to zip through these real quick, see how quick this process is. Not doing this step could add hours to your work. And it could add days to your work if you really don't pay attention to it. Now, Lambert 1 is a Lambert, okay? That's just your default. You're never going to change that. I'll get to what I want to do in a second with that guy. And it's also good to make sure these things are labeled. So if you do find one that's not labeled, you may want to pop it in there. There's also a particle cloud 1. That's a default too. Just leave that one alone. Here's a couple that I mislabeled or didn't label. And I'm pretty good with making sure all of mine are Mias. There's also a shader glow in here. That one's going to stay as a default. I have a surface shader, which I'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so there we go. So everything in here is a Mia, with the exception of my Lambert, my particle cloud, wherever he went, right there, and my shader glow. And in my case, I have a surface shader. All right, so I'm going to go to Lambert 1, and I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to say Select Objects in Shading Group. Now, what I shouldn't get, and I didn't realize I was going to get this, is anything that has that material assigned to it. I'm going to turn my viewport off just because it's going really slow. There we go. So I'm going to right click on my Lambert, select objects and shading group, and anything that has that initial shading group on it will highlight in green. So right away I can see, okay, well I didn't texture this chair, so I need to make sure that that chair has a coloring to it. So I'm just going to go in here, and I had a wood texture. It may have just fallen off. I think it was light brown wood, light blue wood. Oh, there it is. Yellow wood, white wood, red wood. I'm going to go with the red wood. So I'm going to assign that. So I just right clicked and assigned it. So now if I right click on Lambert 1, say select, nothing shows up. Okay, and that's what we want. We want nothing in the scene to have Lambert 1 on it. Okay, or if you realize, okay, I don't know what this material goes to, I can right click and say select, come over here, and I can see, it might be hard for you to see, but the faces on the window here are that color. So this is my window. That's window Mia. And then the next one I right click and select. And these are just my boxes that I have in there. Not wood, they're more cloth. There we go. And then here's my other Mia. And you want to go through this because you want to stay organized. You really never know when, at what point, you may be passing this thing off to someone. And that's my Chrome, and I believe that was the end of it. Yep, okay. So I'm going to save my scene as, and I'm going to call it rendering setup. Okay, so we're ready to start doing the setup for this. Oops. Now looks like my chair is poking through, which is odd. It wasn't poking through before. All right. Let's put the chair in here. Oh, see, I have two chairs. I don't know where the other chair came from. Yes, I do. I had a layer that had a chair on it. That's where that chair is coming from. There we go. And I have two different colored chairs in here, which is fine. One's smaller, one's bigger. It works. Okay. So now we're going to go to our render settings. And oops, we're going to make sure that our render settings are set up correctly. Otherwise, the stuff doesn't work. So this should already have been checked on. This should already have been set up. Good. This we're going to get to and change. Our image format is OpenEXR. Now the reason we're using OpenEXR is because when we do render passes, it stores all of our render passes in one file. So that way our file isn't, we don't have 17 different files that are outputting that we have to then read into Nuke. We can just export each one of them as a single file, compressed together, and then figure it out from there. Okay? We're using some sort of image compression. Some of these you can play with and get different results. Okay? RLE is the one that I've used, and it seems to work, and it's fine. So I use that one. And if you don't use any image compression, your files will go from a few megabytes up to like 50 or 60 megabytes. Frame animation extension, so name.number.extension. Frame padding of 4. Watch up here where this says 0001. If I change this to 3, now we're at 001. If I change this to 2, we're at 01. Okay? This becomes important in some compositing apps where they need this. Okay? So it's typically good practice to leave this at 4. Frame buffer naming, we can just ignore that. Start frame 1, end frame 96, by frame 1. Now here comes the tricky part. Okay, we set up an animated camera. Oops, let me go to my animated camera, which is just my regular perspective view. Okay, now I'm not going to actually just render just this animated camera. This is kind of my placeholder. We're going to do something fancy with this assignment. HD 540, 960 by 540. We don't need to do anything about that. We shouldn't need to worry about the default light. Okay, when we come into our passes, we're going to add in here, I already have them down there so we can see it, ambient occlusion, camera depth, and you could use, we showed camera depth last time. I'm going to show both of these this time, okay, just so you can see what the difference is in both of these. Here's diffuse, here's indirect, here's incandescence, in case we have any lights glowing, reflection, shadow, specular, and then I like to output the UV pass and the world pass. Those are two that I like to have output also in case I ever want to do anything with it. Now some of these, like translucence, you may have translucence in your scene, so it's not a bad idea to drop that in there too. Okay. Oh, and refraction, I definitely want to make sure I get refraction. So I have ambient occlusion, camera depth remapped, camera depth, diffuse, incandescence, indirect, reflection, refraction, shadow, specular, translucence, UV pass, world position. So I'm going to create that and close it. There it is. And I'm just going to click this button to connect it into there. Okay, now I don't need to have all of these in here because I already have some of these. So I'm just going to deselect the ones that I don't have and just subtract them. And then I'm just going to link that into here. Okay. So now let's go into our AO and double click this. Okay. It's coming out as a 16-bit image. A 16-bit image means it can hold a certain amount of data. If I go to 32, it can hold a whole lot more data. Okay. But 16 is good for what we're doing. We definitely don't want to go to 8. 8 is not enough. So 16 is good. We're going to come down here and say use shading engine, or use local AO settings. And then we're going to take the rays up. So I've added 64 rays in this case. I took my spread to 0.8 and my max distance to 1. Okay. Now these settings here are for my scene. You may have to adjust these. The rays is going to control the smoothness of the scene. The spread is going to control how far out the spread is happening. And the max distance is how far it's looking to create the occlusion. So 64.8 and 1 are kind of good starting points. You could also use 5, but I know in this scene my scale is a bit different than my last one, so I'm setting this at 1. So I think 1 is going to be a good value. The UV pass was nothing really to set up on here. Okay. If I go to depth pass, what the depth pass is going to do is it's going to take, just like I mentioned before, switch to a different perspective view. It's going to take where my camera is and map out the distance to the farthest objects in my scene. Okay, so it's going to read these objects here that are closer to my camera as like a 1, and then these ones as a 2, and then a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way back as far as it goes. Okay, now it's going to use values of gray to do that. Okay, so a dark gray would mean that it's closer. A bright white means that it's further away. Okay. So with this set to depth, it's actually going to read in the actual distance to each object. So if I go to a split view, let me go split the view here, layout. Let me just move these off to the side. Okay, so here is my regular perspective camera. I'm going to create a distance node. And I'm going to hold down V and click. And then I'm just going to hold down V and click on something in my scene. Okay. So the distance between my camera and this object right now, this locator, is, come on, click on it, 4.792. So it'll actually write out a pixel that is a value of 4.792. And as I pull this back further, you can see the kind of values that I'm getting. Here's 9.91. Here's 13. Here's 20. Okay? And it'll go back as far as it needs to. As far as it sees stuff in my scene, it'll go back that far. Okay? So there's a lot of different values that are in here that this thing is going to try to write out. So when we're doing this camera depth, I hate when it does that. Okay. when it does camera depth, it's actually just writing out every single point from here all the way out. Okay, so what we end up with is a super white image. If I do depth remapped, what it's going to do is still do this big white image, but then it's going to shrink it down into something that I can see. Okay, and this one takes just a tiny bit more setup. All I have to do is figure out how far an object is, and here's the quick way to do that. I make a sphere, doesn't matter what object, I just make an object. I pull it as far back as I think I want to go. Okay, and you want to leave a little bit of buffer. You don't want to be like right at the edge of your scene. So I'm going to put that sphere there. I'm going to jump to my regular perspective view. Okay, so you can see the sphere in the background. I'm going to go to Display, Heads Up Display, Object Details. And in here it'll say distance from camera 40.954. So then it tells me basically that that sphere is 40 units from my camera. Let's just round it to 41. So if I go to depth remap and I say, okay, well my far clipping plane is going to be at 41. That's the farthest I want you to look for an object. And so instead of going from what the default was 1,000, it's going to then go to 41. Okay. Now if I go to this depth here, you see that this isn't clicked. If I go to depth remapped, you see that it is clicked. So that's really the only difference here, is that the one button is clicked and then we're changing these values. And then of course it's called depth remapped. Okay. So far clipping plane 41 is going to give us clamped value. So it's basically going to lock in our range from 0 to 41 instead of 0 to 1,000. Okay, that just gives you unnecessary data. So I'll render both of these out just so you can see what they're going to do. You can choose either one, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go to diffuse. You see diffuse is good, incandescence is good, indirect is good, reflection is good, refraction, shadow raw. All of these should be good. Okay, it's only the depth remap that we would have to change in the AO. We also have to go to the Features tab and just ensure that ambient occlusion is checked on. Otherwise, we're not going to get any ambient occlusion out of our scene. Let's go to quality, and I turn my quality down. Okay, we're doing test renders right now. It's set to 0.1. My indirect lighting, excuse me, I have final gather turned on, and I'm just going to go turn this guy back to on. Okay, so now we can do some test renders in here and make sure that everything looks good. So I'm just going to go into my view, right click, render my perspective. Okay, so that took about 4 minutes for this guy to render out. So the next one I'm going to do, I'm going to just make sure that my test resolution is set to like 50% so it goes a bit quicker. Okay, so here's where we're at. Now we have to look at our passes. Obviously this doesn't look very clean. Our settings are so low that it just looks like garbage basically. Okay, so we can go to File, Load Render Pass, and then we can click on Depth. Okay, now the problem with using this and seeing the depth here is that we really can't see what's happening. It looks like it's solid white. Okay, so for a lot of my previewing, I like to just go to Nuke. We're going to end up there anyway. So make sure you open up Nuke 7 version 8, okay, 7.0 V8. You might have to type it in the bar here, but get to it. Okay, so Nuke is up. I'm just going to go read in my file. And it's going to be inside your images folder, and because it's just a regular like render image, it's going to be in the temp folder. And if you just search for the latest one, you see that in this case it's in my master layer area. So I'm going to my master layer, and here's my latest one, rendering setup underscore 01.0001.exr, and it's 21 megabytes. Okay, hit open. And I just connect my viewer so I can see it. Okay. Now in here, I'm just going to kind of scoot some of this stuff around a little bit. I want this to be bigger, and I want this to be smaller. So I'm just going to grab my node graph and just drag it over here. Okay, and then I can shrink this. make that bigger. Okay, and let me actually just split this vertically, and I'll drop my node graph down there. Okay, that way you guys can see the image a bit bigger. Okay, so if we look at this, I need to see those passes. I can do that up here. If I click up here and I go to AO, here's my ambient occlusion pass. Okay, and it looks pretty good. I'm pleased with the amount of ambient occlusion that I'm getting. Obviously, it needs some smoothing and stuff, but that's going to happen once I start turning up my render settings. Okay, I have another one that's rendered out that's much cleaner that we'll look at in a second. Here's the camera Z remapped, and in this one you can see all those values. Okay, you can see basically where all of these things are happening. And if I put my mouse really close to the ground here, you see my value down here, if you look at the red channel, is 0.09. And as I go up further away from my object, I'm getting into values that are around 0.34. Okay, and way back here, I'm at about 0.5-ish. Okay, so I could probably adjust that and pull that value in a little bit more. Here is my camera depth, not remapped. Okay, super bright red, can't see a thing in it. But if you look, we do have those values. And some of these objects here that I was clicking on and putting my locator at, you see that I'm basically at about 5. Okay, here I'm at about 5 for where that was at. And as I pull back, I'm going to 13 and 23. Okay, and then back here is 10. Here's my diffuse pass. Here's my incandescence. There's my lights. Here's my indirect. So this is my final gather pass. Here's my reflection. You see I have reflection on lots of different things. And some of it's just a little bit, but it's still there. Here's my refraction. So my windows, glass type objects. Here's my shadow raw. And here's my shadow pass. Now there's a difference between a shadow pass and a shadow raw. The shadow raw does not contain color information. You see there's no color information here. It's just grayscale. My shadow pass actually has color information inside it. Okay. Here is my specular. And then here's my translucence, which I don't have any translucence. Okay. Here's my UV pass. And here's my world position pass. Okay. So all of this stuff, if I put this back to RGBA, all of these things seem like they were a hit and everything worked and it looks gorgeous. If I needed to, I could jump back into Maya, go back to my render settings, grab, let's say, my AO, and I could adjust the max distance or the spread or the raise. I did want to probably adjust that depth remap to maybe bring this into maybe 30. Okay. Now you have to also keep in mind that as your camera is spinning around, as our camera's moving, that there are some things we just don't want to see. Okay. Now I did turn off this guy. We don't want this guy to render, so I put him on a layer and I hit him. Okay, and along with those 3 spheres, because we don't actually want those to render. Okay, so I don't have that guy in my scene. Like I said, everything looks good. You could also, if you needed to, you can grab a section of this and just hit the render region, and it'll render just that region and give you the passes for that region. Okay. You may want to go to a different frame though. Okay, so if I want to keep my whole frame 1, but I want to compare it, I can go to frame 2, do a little render region, let it calculate its thing. Okay, so it rendered this little region here, nothing huge. Then I can come back in a nuke, hit R to read my file in, and right now it's reading, if I click on this, you see it says 1 to 2. Okay, so it's reading this as a sequence. So I can turn that off and just bring in number 2. Okay, hit 1 to connect it to my viewer. Now you can see I'm just viewing that area. Alright, and I can still look at the passes for that area. Alright, so I'm going to delete that because I don't want it. I'll connect this one back in. Now one thing to note, if I go to my ambient occlusion and I look at my window, you'll see that I don't see any of my objects that were in my window shop inside here. When you do ambient occlusion, it basically treats everything as a solid and does the ambient occlusion on that. So in some cases, you may have to render out a separate ambient occlusion pass, but really try to avoid having to do that for this assignment. In this case, I don't really care about that because the objects are so far away that I'm really not going to notice any crazy amounts of ambient occlusion inside here. Okay? So now let's come back to Maya. All right, so now let's imagine that all of our passes work, which mine are pretty much where I want them to be. I'm not going to go and up my final gather or any of those other settings yet. Okay. Now this one's going to be rendered out as a stereoscopic rendering. Okay. I don't know why I'm not at 96 here. Oh, I only went to 90 for some reason. I was doing 96 frames. Let me make sure I change that in here to 90. There we go. Okay. So we're going to do a stereoscopic, meaning that we're going to render this and composite it so that we can have the anaglyph rendering. So if I open up Firefox, it's Google's birthday. Glyph. It's a funky word. We're going to create something kind of like this, where we have this like red and cyan overlap, so that our scene would actually be 3D if we were looking at it in 3D. Okay. So, and we're going to, in Nuke, we're going to render out a couple different things. So we have to create a stereoscopic camera. So we're going to go to Create, Cameras. Where are you at? There you are. And then Stereo Camera. Okay. Now when you get a stereo camera, if I go to the outliner, I open this up, I get a main camera, and then I get a left camera and a right camera. So let me just grab this and pull it out. Oops, let me show cameras in here so I can see my camera. There it is. All right, so you see how I have 3 cameras here. The center one is the one we typically use to line up our shot. And then the left one and the right one are the ones that we would render out. Okay, and the reason we're rendering those out is because we want them to be, we want to get the left eye, what the left eye would see, and what the right eye would see, and then in Nuke, we can combine those 2 images together. So it might be a little bit confusing right now, but you'll get it, okay? So the first thing I want to do is put this camera where my render cam is. Okay, here's my render cam, so I'm just going to hold down V and point snap it. Oops. Come on. There we go. So I've snapped it right to where that camera is. Then I'm just going to use my top view and rotate it until it's lined up with it. Go to my front view. Rotate it here to line it up. Go to my side view, still lined up. Go to my top view, still lined up. Okay, so now this camera is perfectly lined up, with the exception of it looks like it might be a bit crooked. Okay, so I have my 2 views up, which is what you want to do. So you can go to your 2 view layout by going to Layouts, Side by Side, and then from this view I'm going to pick Panels, Stereo, and go to my stereo camera. And you can see definitely my camera is turned. Okay, so in this view I'm going to go back to perspective, and I'm just going to reset one of my rotates here. There we go. I don't know why it looked like maybe this locator is just in the way, or maybe the scale of my other camera just needs to be adjusted. Okay, so I can grab my stereo rig and jump back to the top view and maybe just tweak it slightly this way. There we go. Okay. Now my focal length on my perspective view and the focal length on my stereo cameras are different. Okay. This one, if you remember from a while ago, we set this to 25, or I set mine to 25. So you want to set yours to the appropriate value too. So I'm going to click on my main camera and go to the stereo camera center shape and set that to 25. I'm also going to click on, it's hard to see in here, but I'm going to go to View, Camera Settings is what I want. It's not showing me my camera settings. It could be because my view is too small. View, Camera Settings, and now it just doesn't want to go to it. Whatever. Let me hit tab here. Well, it doesn't want to show me any of these for some reason. Okay. But I want to click on the blue circle to see my view. Click this. Display options, resolution gate. Okay, so I went to the wrong guy. So under panel stereo, I think this is my old one. Stereo camera rig, I want to go to stereo camera center. That's where I want to go. And then I can click on the resolution gate. Okay, there we go. So now I can see where this thing is shooting and just verify that it's correct. All right. So now if I go through and I play, you see that my perspective view moves, but my stereo cameras don't. So this is a simple operation. All I have to do, and I think this does want to be pivoted back a little bit. No, I was rotating it on that weird angle. I'm just going to hit... I'm just going to go into my attribute editor. Go to my stereo camera. And I'm going to change my rotate order. Instead of XYZ, I'm going to say YZX. Maybe that'll help correct it. And it did. Okay. So now I can knock this back in here. And you may not have to do that. It just mine, it was like rotating it for some odd reason. Okay. So now that this thing is lined up where I want it, I can click on my stereo camera. I'm just going to adjust it a tiny bit more. I'm going to click on my stereo camera, and it might be easier to do this in the outliner. Okay, so there's my stereo camera. I'm going to control click my perspective view and hit P to parent it in there. So now if I go through and I scrub, you can see how it's following that camera. So if I click in here and I hit play, we should have the same animation that we had before. And I do. Okay. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go to the outliner. I'm going to grab my stereo camera. And if we go to this view here, all right, and I'm going to go and get my stereo camera settings. So I do want to go to this guy here, panels, stereo camera. Okay, now I can go to stereo and I can see the center, I can see the left, or I can see the right eye. Okay, so I'm going to go to drop this off, and then I'm going to toggle between the left eye and the right eye. And what we want is some sort of difference in here, but I don't want them to be this drastic. These cameras are too far apart for this to even make sense. Okay, this is basically like 6 feet apart is how big the eyes are. We want it to be kind of minimal. All right, we won't get a good stereo effect with this. It'll actually not work at all. So I'm going to go to the attribute editor, and inside my stereo camera, there are some stereo options now. And the first one we want to do is change this. Instead of an off axis, we're going to say converged. And what that means is that at some point, our two cameras are going to meet in the middle. Okay? So if I switch back to my split view here, I'm getting lots of menus. I can't even really see it. It's so far away. Okay? But somewhere way off in the distance, these two cameras, this one and that one, point at the same exact spot. Okay, it might be really far away. Right now it's 254 units away. Okay, zero parallax is where they kind of meet. So if I know that this object right here is about 5 units away, because we kind of played with that earlier, I could set this to 5. And now you can see that these two cameras are now pointing at whatever object it was that I clicked there. And we're actually rotated a little bit. I may have accidentally rotated something in here, but we'll see. So now if I go back here and we do our right eye, left eye, let me fix my rotation. Oops. Let me reset my rotation on this thing. It may really not have liked that. The first time I did this, I didn't have to do that little hack to get that thing to work. So I'm going to grab that and go back to my stereo camera. And reset that to XYZ. All right, let me just rebuild this real quick. Okay, so now I just rebuilt it. And the issue was, I think, twofold. One, it didn't like me grabbing this camera and moving it, which is what I think I did. So make sure you grab the center one and move the center one. All right, so I went here and I set this to converged. And then I initially had this at 5. And I think 5 is just a little bit too close. You can see the difference still in here where it's just like too much movement. Okay, we want to have some, but not this much. So I'm going to take this zero parallax a little bit further back to maybe 10. Okay, and 10 will be about where the phone is, I believe. Okay, and now you can see the difference we have in the left eye and the right eye. Okay, I also play with the initial separation. This, I think it was at 5 or so as the default. You can see how far apart these eyes still are. And if I use my left eye, right eye, we still have a huge jump here. So I want to take this and lower it further in. Okay, and this is really going to be scene dependent, scale dependent. So now if we look at these two views, we have just a slight difference here. And I could probably hone it a little bit further. Maybe put this to 0.5. And maybe, yeah, I think that's good. 0.5. Okay. And sometimes you actually have to go in here and actually physically change this in order for this to work correctly. Okay. So now we're good. We can see the right eye. We can see the left eye. And I think that's going to give us a good amount of parallax in our scene to kind of composite this thing. Okay. And the only way to really see that is to play with it. Now we could go in here and go to stereo and turn anaglyph on, and this will give us a preview of what this is going to look like when we composite it. Okay, so this is taking the left eye and the right eye and putting it together and giving us this appearance. Okay, so if we see, okay, maybe the colors here are a little bit too far apart, I can go grab my camera and I can change this to 0.25. Maybe if I adjust the parallax, see, if I go to 5, I think that's better. All right, so we do want this a little bit lower. I think it's too low. 5, 7, 8. You see how I get this here at 9, and I'm pretty close. I don't know why 10. Okay, it didn't like 10 before, but it does like 10 now. Okay, so keep playing with these settings until it gets kind of locked into where you need this to be adjusted. At 10, I'm at the sign. You can see where the colors, the two colors are coming together. So right there is going to be my zero ground, and then everything in front of the camera will kind of pop out one way, and everything behind the camera will pop out another. You can see here where my red is off to the right, and then up, even up here it's off to the right. Yeah, okay. So we should be good, all right? So this should be a good setup. I clicked on the camera here so I can adjust these two settings. That's still at 25 because it adjusted all of them. So we should be good. So now let me go to my render settings. And in here we're going to pick that we want to render the stereo camera left. The stereo pair is what we want to render. Okay, and that will render both of the cameras. It'll render the left view and the right view. So now we're going to go through and go delete our file name prefix. We're going to right click and we're going to say insert scene name. Okay, that way we call rendering setup. We'll put an underscore. I'm going to right click and say insert camera name. Okay, so now what it's going to be called, if you look at this, rendering setup 01 underscore stereo camera left dot 0001 dot exr. Okay, so now if I go through and I do a test render, so let me go through and Actually, I'll just go through the regular way. Okay, I'm just going to go back to my render settings, because sometimes batch renders can be a bit quicker. I'm just going to set my start and end frame to 1. And I'm just going to go to render and say batch render. And it's only going to render 1 frame, but it'll set it out there. So I hit batch render and close. I wait for this stuff to finish. And then we can take this in a nuke and play with it. Okay, so I'm jumping in the middle of this while it's still rendering. And you can see this has percent of rendering done 100, and then it's doing another frame. And what's happening here is that it renders the left camera. So if I scoot this over, I hold this over, you can see where it says stereo camera left, and now it's doing stereo camera right. So it will physically render 2 frames, basically, per 2 cameras per frame, right? But the results of this are going to be phenomenal, especially, you know, showing your ability to take renderings and bring them into 3D. Even though this is limited in what we can do with it, the benefits are definitely out there. So I'm going to pause again, and then we'll come back when it's done. Okay, so now we're done, so let's go into Nuke. And I'm just going to delete this guy. Hit R to read in our new frame. And if we go into our images folder again, there's a master layer folder now. And inside the master layer folder, this is how it would have done it if we didn't name our stuff. It would have made a stereo camera right folder and a stereo camera left folder and made the renderings inside there. Now what it's doing is separating it into 2 separate renderings. So rendering setup 01 for left, rendering setup 01 for right, and I'm just going to grab both of these and hit open. So now here's my left, here's my right. Okay, so if I hit 1, there's that one. Click on this one, hit 2, and then I can hit 1, 2, 1, 2, and I can see the change here. Okay, and that's what we want to have. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a join views. Oops, not a join views. Now we do want join views. I forgot one extra step. Okay, so we need to do join views, but right now it doesn't know that we want to work in a stereoscopic mode. So it's just going to allow me to connect it to one thing. Okay, so I'm going to click in the background and hit S, and that'll bring up my settings. And in here, I have this Views tab. If I click on the Views tab, it says Main. See how it says Main here? That's where it's connecting that to Main. So I'm going to go to Setup Views for Stereo. And so now I'll have, if I come up here, I'll have a left and a right. Okay, so I can close that. So now if I come down, disconnect, now I have a left and I have a right. I'll connect this into here. Okay. So now it's combined these 2 views into one view, so that if I wanted to, I could use my comma and semicolon to toggle between the 2 views. Okay. Now if I want to see what this is actually going to look like as far as like the 3D version, I'm going to add an anaglyph node after this. So I'm going to hit Tab, hit anaglyph, and just make sure it's connected in the chain. And then you can see how we get our 3D view. And then we can put our coloring back into this. So now we have our coloring, plus we have our anaglyph, plus the rest of our stuff, and we're good. Okay. So now this is the end result of what we're going to do after we've done all our other compositing. So we're going to just set up one of these guys and make sure the rest is good. Now I recommend doing all of your nuke work first and then going through and actually rendering it out. Okay. Because if you try to do your nuke at the end of it, what happens if something doesn't work? And then you have to re-render it anyway. All right. So it's always best to kind of set that stuff up initially. So I'm going to go just to my left view here. It doesn't matter which one you start with. And what we want to do is we want to break this image apart. We're getting to the phase where we want to be able to control more than just the depth and the AO. Okay. We want to break this apart essentially and put it back together. So I'm going to add in what's called a shuffle node. So I hit Tab, type shuffle. And this shuffle node allows me to separate my channels here. Okay. Right now the only way for me to access them is to go up here and play with them, or to drop a node on here and adjust that specific node. Okay, but even if I drop something on here, like let's say I did a grade, I connected it, and I said, okay, well I want to adjust the reflections. And I started to play with these sliders here. Nothing's going to happen. It's adjusting the reflections, but it's only adjusting the reflections. I'm looking at this image here is the actual like master beauty is what it's called. Okay, reflection is just like a hidden layer. If I come up here and go to reflection, you can see how now these sliders are having some effect on what I'm doing. Okay, but this is just like a hidden background thing that it's showing. Switch that back to RGB. So I'm going to shuffle out all of my nodes. So I'm going to say ambient occlusion, AO. Oops, actually AO underscore left. It's my left camera. And then I'm going to copy that. I'm going to click on my, or click off of everything and paste it. Come on. There we go. And then I'm just going to drag it on here and then pick my next one. Now I can't just pick it from here. I have to double click first. Make sure it's loading the new one I've just copied, and then load in the camera depth. In this case, I'll use the remap because I already showed the other one. Okay, and then I'll make sure it's set to depth remap left. Okay. Now this one's going to be a bit more setup than the other one. That's fine. Let it be more setup, because the more knowledge we have about Nuke, the better our work can become. So now we have diffuse. Okay, and I'm already going to start getting into a big branch here. So I'm going to ignore this for now and just make this bigger so we can see what we're doing. Okay, and actually what I can do is just temporarily move the node graph up here. There we go. Now we can see our views, and we can see this. All right, set that guy aside. So let's go to another shuffle node. I could have copy pasted, whatever, doesn't matter. Make sure I pick the next one, incandescence, left. Okay. Now I want to start keeping this stuff organized. So ambient occlusion is going to be something I'll use later, so I'm just going to drop it down here. My depth I'll use later, so I'm going to drop it down here. Diffuse and incandescence I'm going to use pretty much right away. These lines are going to start to get cluttery, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my read node, hit tab, and drop in what's called a dot node. That's all it is, a dot. Okay? It allows me to keep organized. So now I can hold control, and that creates more dots, or lets me add more dots. So I'm going to click and drag this dot to there. Click and drag this dot here. And I'm going to click a dot right there. And just drag this guy here. And delete that dot. There we go. Okay, so you can see how I'm trying to just keep this somewhat organized. We'll add another dot here, connect it to that dot. Now this might get confusing for you, but let it get confusing and just work your way through it, okay? Try to figure out what we're trying to do with all this mess is to, one, just keep it organized. This dot here, if you look at it, this dot is that. This dot is still that. This dot is still that. It makes no difference if I go here or to the dot, because this is like flowing into each one of these. So that's why there's arrows pointing to it. Now if I connected this to that, obviously there would be a different setup, because it's going into the dot, going into this node, and then coming into this. So I want to make sure it's all connected to the dots. So copy another one, paste another one. This one will be, oops, I have to connect it before it lets me do anything. This one will be indirect. Left. I'm going to hit, hold control, drag another dot out. Copy it, paste it, connect it to that dot. Double click it. This is my reflection. And these skills that you're doing here are going to be essential for if you get into any jobs where you need to render passes out and then put them back together. Here's my refraction. Some companies, their first job, your first job is just to kind of go in there and do this for all their renderings, to go through and organize their stuff, so that the people who are the actual compositor people can put it all together. Now we have two shadows here. I'm going to leave this on just regular shadow for now, or the shadow raw for now, and then we'll see what each one is going to look like. Okay, so I'm just going to call this shadow left. Okay, paste another one in. Control, drag a new box out, a new dot out. Specular. Click. I don't have any translucence, so I'm just going to leave it. Let's see, UV pass and world position. We don't need either of these in this case, so I'm just going to delete that last dot. Okay, so we should have up here 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 if you needed translucence. Okay, if you saw anything was in your translucence pass, you'd want to make sure you get that. All right, and there's a reason we're doing this all for just one camera, because then we can just duplicate it, change some things, and everything else follows suit. Okay. So now what we need to do is these things are all separated. So let me just drop my node graph back over here. Oops, back down here. There we go. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look at, I'm just going to click on my pass here, my depth pass, and hit 1. And here's my depth pass remapped. You'll see it's in gray and not in white this time, or not in red. Here's my AO. Here's my diffuse. Here's incandescence. I'm just clicking 1 on each one of these. There's indirect, reflection, refraction, shadow, and specular. Okay. Now I'm going to switch shadow and specular. Shadow should come last. So I'm just going to take that off and just connect these in line. Okay. Now if I go to Google and we type in MIA material X passes PDF. There we go. And I've already downloaded this thing. No. Alright, so we're in the document here. If we just scroll down, and you see down here way at the bottom-ish, middle-ish, page 50, our beauty pass, which is what we typically see, is a result of the diffuse plus the indirect plus the specular plus reflection plus refraction plus translucence plus the add result. Okay? So if we look at that, and where is Nuke? There you are. And we're going to take these and just add each one of these guys in together. Okay? So we're going to click on this, hit tab, and I'm going to add a plus node. Okay? And a plus node is no more than a merge node with this thing set to plus. That's all it is. Okay? But we're doing a plus, so let's just keep it as a plus. So I'm going to click my A is going to go to the diffuse. My B is going to go to incandescence. Okay? So now if I click on diffuse, that's what that looks like. If I click on incandescence, that's what that looks like. If I click on the plus, now that's what those two look like together. Okay? So I'm going to just drop this under here, hold control, drag a little dot there. Okay, let me get rid of this extra line. So now I'm going to add a plus into here. So I'm going to click on my plus, hit tab, you see the plus is still there, hit plus again. So now I'm going to drag my B up to there. So now it's adding the indirect in. So here's a result of just the incandescence with our diffuse. This is a result of our indirect being added to that result. Let's hit click on this and hit tab, add another plus, and add the reflections. Now our reflections are in there. Let's click on the plus, hit tab, add another plus. Now our refractions are in there. Click on this, hit tab, add another plus. Now our speculars are in there. And then this one, you see that in the formula here, shadows are not in here. Okay? And this add result is the incandescence. So what we need to do is we're going to do something else. I'll just show you what plus is going to look like. Okay, and you see that plus makes our shadows look white. So we could actually use a plus and just add an invert to the alpha channel, maybe. No. Okay, so I did have that right. I want to do an invert. And then I want to make sure that my merge is then set to multiply. Okay, on plus, it's going to blow it out. But on multiply, what it's going to do is if I look at this, it's going to take these black values here, and it's going to darken those areas. In these white ranges, we're not going to see anything. So in these areas, I could take that and do that. Now, if we look at this, before we go to the shadow pass, you see we already have shadows, okay? So that's why in Maya, if we go to our render settings and passes and add, that's why they have a diffuse without shadows. And then they have a specular without shadows and translucence without shadows. So if we were going to do a shadow pass where we needed to play with the shadows afterward, we would definitely want to render that out separately. Okay. Now you can also use these shadow passes as a way to isolate the shadows and color the shadows and tint the shadows. Like if I went to my shadow here, let's go there, and I hit G for grade, I can adjust my shadow coloring. Make sure I'm viewing it. Adjust my lighting, adjust my coloring in here, just in using those shadows as a way to do that. There we go. Now we can really see those shadows being adjusted. Then I could even come in here and tint them. Obviously it's tinting the whole thing, and I would need to do just a little bit more work to get rid of this red. And I'm basically going to just put a clamp on here so that I don't introduce more red into the scene. I go back to that, and you can see now my shadows have a bit of a red tint to them. Okay, or maybe a blue, maybe a yellow, whatever. So I like to render the shadow pass out in case I want to tint the shadows, but I'm not even going to really use this as my final pass. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it here in case I decide that I really want to adjust my shadows. So this is going to be the end node of this, so I'm just going to kind of pull this up a little bit like that. Okay, so I'm going to use this as my last node. Oh, what was that? So here's my last node. Everything's combined. Now what we should see is that this rendering looks pretty identical to that rendering. Okay, and if I go 1, 2, 1, 2, so I'm just cycling between 1 here and 2 here, you can see they look identical. There is no change at all, with the exception of the background. Okay, when we're doing our passes, the background doesn't come in there. So now I need to add the background back into this. Okay, but I'm just going to make sure if I go to my ambient occlusion, you see how this background is black. So if I go, no, it's not my ambient occlusion. There you go. This is my ambient occlusion. My background is black. So what's going to happen is it's going to, when I introduce this, it's going to darken it. So my adding of the background I typically do as a last thing, not a first thing, okay, or even third, fifth. So we'll add the background in, but we're going to add that in after we're done with the rest of this. Okay, so we're here at this stage where we've added our specular in. The shadow we're going to ignore for now. And all I want to do is I'm going to take my ambient occlusion and I'm going to multiply it times that. Okay, so I'm going to click on ambient occlusion, hit tab, go to multiply, and where it says merges. And I'm just going to bring this guy in and connect it here, and then make sure I'm viewing it. I'm just going to take this other arrow off. There we go. Okay, so now if I look at this, I just tap the space bar. My ambient occlusion is multiplied times my specular, okay, which is actually the result of all this stuff. So now if I go and look at this, this is the result of that multiplication. So if I click on that and hit D, it's going to disable it. Hit D again, it re-enables it. So if you look at the difference, there's a huge difference in the realism of this compared to that. Look at here on the phone booth especially. You can see how it just kind of like makes what are called contact shadows a little bit more visible. You can see there's even a nice little shadow right there. Okay. Fun fact, ambient occlusion was invented on the movie Titanic. That's where they decided that they needed something there, so they created that. Alright, so now we're going to do the depth. And the depth we have to basically, we're going to use this back in the chain. So we're going to take our depth here, and we're going to copy it back into the chain. So I'm just going to click on this and hit K for copy. And if I move this copy node between that, you can see how that line highlights. I let go. And now this is inside that chain. So I can double click the copy and say I want to copy the red channel, RGBA red, into, holy cow, that's a lot, the depth channel. Here it is, depth Z. Okay. So now once I have this, then I can hit tab and say Z defocus. If you don't have Z defocus, it's because you're working in the wrong version of Nuke. Just save it, close it. Speaking of saving, let me save mine. Alright, so here's my Z defocus. I'm going to click on what I want in focus. Okay, so I've just moved my cursor, or moved that focal point to where that is. And if I move it over here, that'll be in focus. Okay, now obviously my building is my focal point, so I want to have that in focus. Alright, now if I look at this here, where it is, depth channel, I make sure this is set to depth Z. Good. My output is showing the result. I can go to focal plane setup, and here where this is blue is going to be in focus. That's where my focal plane is hitting. So then I can take my depth of field up, and I'll get this green area, and that's going to be what's in focus. The blue is what is in front of the focus region, and the red is what's behind it. Okay, so then I can turn this back to result, saying that I want to make sure this green area is definitely in focus. And then if I needed to, I can play with these blur settings. Okay, you want it to be subtle. You don't want to go, I'm going to put this up to a crazy amount like 100, and put this size amount up to 100 also. And it's thinking, that's how blurry this thing is going to be. There we go. That doesn't look right at all, obviously. Okay? So let's keep these values minimal. We want to have some blur there, but we don't want it to be screaming at us, hey, look at this blur. This isn't a macro photo, okay? We should have some softness, but nothing bananas. Oops. 2.5. Okay? That amount of blur, I think, is good. And I can check it just by clicking on that and hitting D again to turn it off, D to turn it on. Let me zoom in on some of these areas back here. All right, maybe I could use a little bit more. So maybe I will go back to 5. Okay. There we go. All right, and like I said before, we can always adjust that. All right. Now, in our end animation, we're going to animate this. We're not going to animate it now, obviously, because we don't have an animation to animate it to. So we'll leave it just like that. Good. Perfect. Wonderful. And that's it. Okay. So that's all we're going to do for this one. Now, if we needed to, this is why we broke this apart. Because we could say things like, ooh, let me see the reflections here. Reflection. There we go. I'm going to disable the plus on here. Let's disable my reflection, actually. Because of how that's linked in, it's not letting me just disable the reflections. But if I looked at this and I said, you know, these reflection areas are just way too reflective, I really want to tone these down. That's why we can do this kind of stuff, or that's how we can do this kind of stuff. So I'm going to click on the reflection, hit G for grade, and then I can just adjust like my multiply. Okay, taking this down, let's look at the actual reflection here, and then there's the grade. Taking this down is just going to darken those reflections. So the reflection just becomes softer and not as prominent. So here it is with that. Here it is without it. Okay. So you can see the effect that the reflections are having on the overall coloring of my scenery. Okay, and I can bump up the reflections too if I really wanted to. Okay. I could also go in here and tint the reflections, giving them a little bit of a cast. I'm going to hit this TMI here, and I like this one because it's a temperature one. So I could say, let's go into the yellow range. Oops, too far. And now you see that I have these kind of like touches of yellow in my scene instead of these touches of blue, which could make a nice addition to the scenery, which I actually kind of like as an alternative. Okay, and this is why people would use this, is because the car manufacturer or the car modeler, renderer, whatever, would want to go in there and say, okay, well, I really need to adjust the coloring on this car. That just doesn't seem right. I really would like the car's color to be a little bit more yellow, a little bit more red, whatever the case is. You'll notice that when I did my ambient occlusion on here also, was it that? Oh, we just didn't have it in there yet. Okay. I got scared because my stuff disappeared. All right, it's there. There we go. So we're good. So we can go in here and adjust things like the refraction. I can adjust the specular. I could even add a defocus on here. And a defocus is different than a Z defocus. This one is just a blur. So I could actually blur my specular. Okay. I could even add in here, I can click on that and add a glow, just like we did in another one. And I'm just going to view this area here. There we go. So now you can see we have this glow happening. And let's pull this brightness up a little bit. There we go. Let's take the size up slightly. Now I'm going to take the tolerance up as well. And you see what the tolerance does is it just kind of isolates those areas better. Let's take that size down, actually. Let's take that size down. Let's take this tolerance down. There we go. So what I'm doing, if I take the glow off and add it, you see how I'm adding just a little bit more bling to some of those hot spots. So now let me hit the plus. And let's turn that off. So if I zoom in on these areas, you can see how I've kind of blown out those highlights there. And I can pull the glow up a little bit more and really kind of accentuate those things. Okay? Without doing this separation, we could still do these things, but it's a little bit more difficult to do. And realistically, if you're going to be working in an environment, this is the kind of setup that they're going to want, because they're going to want to be able to go in here and say, okay, I want to play with this, 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 and I want to do that to this, and this to that, and whatever else. Okay, even our shadow here, let's say we wanted to use the shadow, they could simply just grab, let's go here, they can grab this B and just connect it here. Oops, not there. Connect it here. There we go. And now we've introduced the shadows back into the scene. We don't want the shadows. We click there. Shadow coloring, no shadow coloring. Okay? So you see how easy this is to make changes even after we're done rendering. Okay? Beautiful. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. All right, so that's it. That's all that we are going to do for this channel. Okay. Now, because we're doing this anaglyph, once you have one of your channels done, we're going to duplicate it for the other channel. So I'm just going to grab all this stuff here, hit Control C, come over here, paste it, move this up, and then I'm just going to drag this to there. Okay, now it's not done yet. We still have some work to do. I'm just going to move my node graph up here. Okay, now if I go to the result of this and I hit 1, you see that I get nothing. Let me go back to my node graph. The reason I get nothing is because if I click on this depth map here and I go to this name, right now it's connected to the other depth map. So I'm going to click on this. Right now it's connected to the left channel. I need to connect it to the right. So I'm going to click on that and then just rename this right. Okay, and so if I view that depth channel now, I'll actually get something. So I just need to do that for each one. Go to the AO and just pick the AO right. Double click that. Go to my diffuse. And you may not be able to read the name. It doesn't matter. You just need to double click and just go through the process of here's incandescence, here's my other one, click the other one. Here's indirect, here's indirect. Here's reflection, here's reflection. Here's refraction, here's refraction. And I could even copy pasted the word right, so I didn't have to keep going through and typing it, but whatever. Doesn't hurt to work on your typing skills. Okay, so now if I come in here and hit 1, and I move my node graph back down here, there we go. Now I should be basically at the same spot I am with my other camera. So if I click on this one and hit 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, you can see how I have the setups exactly perfect. And I want to make sure that any changes that I did here are affected over there too. I wouldn't want to not have the glow or the grade on one side and not the other. It's loading, there we go. So if you look at the reflections here, you can see how there's like a color tint. If we look at the specular here, you can see how we're kind of losing that specular. Okay. So we want to make sure that all those things are the same on both sides. And if we did create something new, like if we realized after the fact that really we wanted this incandescence to glow too, let's go into 2. There we go. So I'm taking my incandescence and just really cranking it up, just so you can really see this difference here. Alright, so there we go. So now we have this incandescence, so you can see it glowing. Okay, so now we have this huge difference of this stuff happening here. Okay. So now what we need to do is we would just copy that. So I'd click on this, copy it, click on this, paste it, and now it's in the chain and it works. Okay. So now if I do 1, 2, 1's gonna have to redraw itself, so let it redraw itself. There we go. You see how we have that same thing happening there. Okay, so now we're still missing the sky, and I left that out purposely just so we can see how to put it together on one and then copy that over to the other one as well. So I'm going to go to my result. Okay, here's my defocus, and I'm going to add in my background. So I'm going to go to here. Okay, now if I look at this image and I hit A up here, you see how we have an alpha channel. That's what the alpha channel is showing us. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this image, paste it in there. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say merge. Here's my merge. And I'll do this in here so we can see it, and then we'll look at the result. So here's my merge. Let's unhook these things. My B is going to be this. My A is going to be that. We don't want to have lines going through our graph. That's messy. So we hold down Control, add some droplets in here, Nice and neat. Okay, now if we go to the result and we view it, what we're going to see is we basically have our sky back in. Okay, now this is deceiving because our sky isn't really back in. If I scoot this over, hit 2 here, 1 there, you can see that the changes we did are no longer being affected. Well, what's happening with me merging this right now is that it's basically merging my old building or my old image right on top of the other one and getting rid of all the changes that we made. So what I have to do is I have to add an invert in here. So I'm going to go to invert, and I've just placed it here so I can just drag it right into there. And I don't want to invert all the channels. What I want to do is invert just the alpha channel. Okay, so now what's happening is it's taking the alpha and flipping it. So now we have white out here and black inside here. And for some reason it seems like it's pretty dark. Oh, I'm looking at the other channels. There you go. So if we look at that 0 to 1 value, we're good. Okay. So now if we look at this, oops. Yeah, let me unhook those. Okay, and then we go from here, and that's 1, and this is 2. You can see how all we're really doing here is just adding in that sky now. Okay. Now I want to, if you look at the edges of this, the edges used to be a little bit soft, and now they're kind of like not so good. Okay, we've kind of lost some of that blur there. So I'm going to go into my invert here. I'm going to add a defocus node, and I'm just going to blur the alpha channel. Okay, so let me look at that now and see. Okay, we've blurred the alpha channel a bit. Let's see if that gives us better results. We're still kind of like cropping into it a little bit too much here in the back. Alright, so defocus, maybe not the best one. Let's try a different one called erode. And there's 3 erodes, fast, filter, and blur. I like to use the blur one. And in this, we're going to go and look at the result of this. I'm going to blur the alpha channel, and I can also erode the alpha channel and pull it in. Okay. Now what's happening with this is that we're actually eroding our stuff, and we're seeing basically the old image, and that's why this isn't working the exact way I wanted that to work. So I played around with this a little bit just so you can see, and what I did was put it before it. Okay. So I've taken my inverted the alpha, and put the alpha or the background on before I did the Z to focus. And although I'm not getting the world's greatest results in this case, I would have, oops, tab. I do have much better results than I was getting before. All right, if we look at those edges now, they are fuzzing together the way they should be fuzzing together to a point. There is some grain happening in here. Now, one of the reasons for this is if I go and look at my depth here, and oops, don't look at that. I look at the depth here. There we go. We basically have values for all of this. But once we get there, we have nothing. Okay. So you see how we just kind of like drop off all of a sudden, and there's no real like softening to this kind of mess back there. So there's always stuff that we can do to kind of make this stuff look a little bit better. One of the things we can do is add an erode, but add a blur node here and put it on the depth and just see what's going to happen if we just blur it slightly. And you can see just by blurring it slightly, we do get better results. I think maybe that might be too much. I think 2 is going to be good. Okay, so it's just going to soften that background a little bit. Okay, and it's going to help soften some of these other items that might be a little bit a little bit too crisp. Okay, if we look at a lot of these things in that depth channel, there is like a huge drop off between here and the stuff behind it. Okay, you can see over a pixel, if you look at that red channel, we're dropping in. Once I add this blur, then it's going to help soften that transition a little bit more, so we don't get any super duper hard edges. Okay, so that's what Nuke really is, designed to do, is allow you super refined control over a lot of your stuff. But you have to pay attention to where all of this stuff is. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is copy that same setup into the other one. So all I really created here was this. So I'm just going to copy the merge, the blur, and the depth, and the invert. Sorry, the merge, the blur, and the invert. I'm going to paste it over here. There it is. And then I'm just going to scoot this down here. And then reconnect this arrow to blur. Reconnect this B to copy. And if it makes it easier for you just to kind of redo that setup, then just redo that setup. And then, of course, this guy has to be connected here. And we have to create a nice little line up there, right? So now if we look at this one is 2, this one is 1. And let it go through its thinking process. There we go. You can see that they are identical, except for that tiny bit of an offset. All right. So now that we have these things, and if we look at this, as you're looking at Nuke stuff, look at it as kind of like a channel, okay? As like rivers and streams kind of coming together. So here is where the source of our water is going to go, and we follow the arrows to get to that end result. So we follow these arrows and see this one's going this way, these ones are going this way, this one's coming down here. They're branching off, and then they're coming together into this final node. Okay? And that final node here and here, scoot that down. And I like things to be symmetrical, so I'm just going to adjust slightly, not too crazy. Some of these other nodes that just want to be closer to where their friends are. There we go. All right, so that's good enough. So now we can add in here our join views. And that's what we played with at the very beginning of this whole mess. So left here, right here, view it. So now they're joined. So now we can use the two buttons, the colon, or the semicolon and the comma, to cycle back and forth. Then we can go in here and add, it's not there. Go to our join views and add an anaglyph node. And then we can play with that amount of color. There we go. And it took a second for it to register. So now if you had 3D glasses, like I have 3D glasses, or if you want to borrow my pair, just don't get any gunk on it, and you looked at your image, you would see that it is indeed a 3D image. It looks like stuff is popping out of here. Now this is one way to do stereoscopic anaglyph type imagery. Okay, there's other stuff too that we can do to play with this. It's actually very trippy to watch your screen mouse move around because it looks like it's actually like going behind the pole, which is kind of neat. Okay. There's other things we can do to kind of fudge things around a little bit. There is oops, I forget the name of it, so I'm going to go over here to this menu where the eyes are, go to stereo, and I can say reconverge. And what this allows me to do is basically set up a convergence point and then shift my numbers around here. Okay, so we don't need to do that. I'm just going to leave it alone. We could also take this and pull this in. Okay, if we want a black and white image, just leave it up. All right, so there it is, 3D stereoscopic. So then we're going to write this guy out. So we're going to write this out. There we go. And we're going to name this. We're going to turn in 2 movies for this one. One movie is going to be the anaglyph movie, and the other movie is going to be your no anaglyph on here, just like a flat rendering of it. Okay. So let's go to Sarcona 2520. Where are we at? Work. Street corner. Let's go to make a new folder in here. Nuke out. And we'll name this anaglyph. Anaglyph. Dot pound 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 dot TIF. Okay. Now we're rendering out, in this case, we're rendering out RGBA. We really don't need the alpha channel. You can see if I hit A, we have an alpha channel. We don't need that. So I can render out RGB and just make this a smaller file size on the output. Okay. So then we would hit render once all of our stuff is done. Keep in mind that this is still just a single image. Okay. You're going to be rendering out the sequence and having all of your animation in here set up. Okay. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is here, all set up. Then I'm also going to render out, I can actually just copy this and paste it, one of your channels. I don't care if you render the right or the left out, but you're going to render out the right or the left here, okay? And then what you're also going to render out, let me just double click this and change this instead of anaglyph. This is going to say left composite. And let's also make sure our names are in here. Okay, when you guys turn stuff in, you need to have your name in the naming of this. Okay, oops. And then you're also going to be turning in one of your original files. So I'm going to go up to this one here, which is the left view, and I'm going to paste that right node and just connect it here. And I'm going to say left single. Okay. Now when you render this one, it's just going to be a single file. So I'm going to hit render and then just let this go to input 1 to 1. Okay. Or I can just say 1, frame 1, hit OK. Okay. Now when you render these things, it's going to be, I lost my spot, there it is. It's going to give you an error. So I'm going to, let's say I want to render this one out because we're at frame 1. This is one we could, if I look at the view, this is the flattened left single original underscore Sarcona. There we go. Left single original Sarcona. I'm going to hit render, hit frame 1, and I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to give me an error saying it can't do it for multiple views. Remember, we have 2 views here that is trying to figure out which view we want. So we have to tell it when we go to this views that we only want to render the left channel. So we uncheck the right. Now it just says left. I hit render, hit OK. Now down here where we have our sequences, I double click this. We're still doing just the left channel, so hit OK. And we hit render there once we have our whole sequence ready. And then when we go to our anaglyph right, we're not writing out the left and right channel. We're rendering out just the left channel. So then we would hit render and hit OK. Okay, once our sequence is done. And then what we're going to have, there we go. What we're going to have here is a single image, which I forgot to put my name in here. See, I can rename stuff after too. Here's my anaglyph movie, so that's going to be both. I'm going to have an anaglyph, or a single original. Alright, one of these is not right named. Let me see this one. Left composite. I named that one left composite. Maybe I didn't render this one out. There we go. Alright, so I have the anaglyph movie of both my images put together into that anaglyph. I have my left composite movie, which is going to be just the movie without any fancy anaglyph type stuff on here. Okay, but it's going to be the movie of everything kind of composited together with your adjustments on there. So with my little bling stuff up here on this thing. Okay, then we have our left single, which is just a single frame before we did any compositing. And when I grade this, I'm going to go through and say, okay, we have the single. Here's the composite. What changes were made between the single and the composite? And then I'm going to look at the anaglyph with my glasses just to make sure we didn't like just try to use the right channel twice, we should definitely see some 3D in there. And if you need to get a pair of glasses, get a pair of glasses. I'm going to bring mine, so you can use mine if you need to. But they're only going to be there while I'm there. Okay? So that's going to be it. Obviously, we want to save this stuff, and we should have saved it a while ago. I think I did. Class composite. There we go. Okay. Yes. Okay, so that's it. That's it as far as the nuke side goes. So now that I know that all of this stuff is going to work, now I want to go back into Maya. You thought we were done with Maya. We're not. Now I want to go back into Maya, and I want to increase my settings. So my unified sampling. 1 is probably the minimum you want to have that at. 2, if you're getting grain. Always check your renderings. Watch frame 1, watch frame 2, watch frame 3, and as they come out, you may need to say, okay, let me cancel my rendering and up this quality setting. Okay? For my final gather, I'm going to leave this as final gather 50, 0.5, and 50. Oops, let me make sure I go back to the common tab and set my end frame back to 90. Okay. That should be good. Stereo camera, good. I'm going to save. I'm going to save scene as, ready to render. And my name, of course. Okay. So then I'm going to render this. I'm going to go to render batch, render option box. Make sure that this thing is auto render threads is off, and this number is cranked up as high as we can, like 12. You may have to put it to 16 or 18 or whatever it is. I'll just hit batch render and close. Nuke does not respond when Maya's rendering, so I'm just going to close Nuke. Okay, don't even try to work in Nuke while it's rendering. You'll just get super frustrated. It won't work, and you'll be upset. Close that guy down too. Okay, so it's going to render through here. I'm going to right-click on my taskbar, go to the task manager, and then in here, I'm going to watch for Maya batch. This is at 011, 04, 11, 21. This CPU right here, CPU, under processes, should jump up to above 30. Okay, it may take a few minutes for it to get there, but it should jump up above 30. And if I look at this here, it says rendering with mental ray, it's really not going to start jumping until we get to progress. Okay, so now I'm rendering. I've got some progress here. I'm at 24. It's still not even close to being 30. There we go. Now it jumped up to 46. Jump back down to 30, up to 62, up to 79. Okay, so now I'm good. I can let this thing go. I just want to right-click, set priority below normal. Never, ever, ever set it above normal, high, or real time. These do absolutely nothing. They are Microsoft's joke at making you think that you have more control over your computer than you do. These will do nothing. Don't touch them. Okay? Leave these to normal, below normal, or low. So I want to set this to below normal. Change priority. There we go. I'm done. I can close this. I can save my scene. I can close Maya down. And just let this thing chug. Okay? Now I want to make sure that once frame 1 comes out, it's going to be in my master layer. It'll be inside here called frame 1. I want to look at it and I want to make sure that frame 1 looks beautiful. Remember, I'll have a left and a right, so I want to open those. You can't open them in FCheck. Use DJV view. You can open them up in DJV view. It's hard to say. Clear, close, whatever, open. And here's my rendering. And I can just make sure that my layers are still good. Here's my AO and here's whatever else. Okay? So make sure they're good. If they're not good, we've closed Maya, so we can't do the cancel batch render. So I'm going to go to the task manager, right click, end process, go into Maya, fix it up, render it again, check it out, make sure it's good. Okay? You have to check this stuff. If you don't check this stuff, your stuff is not going to work correctly most of the time. Okay? Alright, so that's it. Let it render. Take it through Nuke. Fix it up. You'll have to animate the key point just like we did in the Gillette can. the focus point for the blurring. You'll have to render out the sequence just like we did in the Gillette can. And then we'll take it into After Effects just like we did the Gillette can and render that out. Okay? So that's going to be it for this assignment.